Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome again to another lecture on SQLite on Android systems. So this is the fourth video that we're doing on SQLite. In this previous video, just to recap what we did, remember we have in the main activity, we have a simple class, one activity. We have insert and a find button. In the insert, we take the information from here. When we click on the insert, it will take the data and insert it in the SQLite. It was successful. It will give us a toast message that it was successful. If not, it will say it was not successful. We've created a main in the main activity Java. We have two functions. This is the insert. We coded this one last time, which is basically the insert. We got the data, validate the data, you create the object, and then you call the helper class. You get reference to the helper class, and then you call the helper class method, which is add member. Now, here's the return message. If we go to the helper class, this is what we did in the helper class. We have an add member. We got reference to the database, get writable database. And when you do this, it will call the onCreate if it hasn't created it for the first time. It will create this method, which is basically create the table. Since this has been done already, it will not call this method again. And then we create the content value, the field names with the values from the screen that is being passed to us as an object here. Then this just display it on the, then we say insert into the database, the member, and the content value. And then the content value is the key value pairs, basically. This one is to allow nulls or null columns, what to do with null columns. We close the database and we return it was true or false. So we did that in the last video. So what are we gonna do next? What we're going to do next, we're gonna say, we want to be able to find a particular record. How do we find a particular record? Okay, there's different ways that you can do this. So if we go back to the main activity, the basic concept, you type in a value here, or here, or here, anywhere you want. And when you click on find, it would list the information that you're looking for. We're gonna do the simple one first, which is basically looking for a particular one person. So we're gonna use the ID as the primary key, since the ID is our primary key. And when we click on find, if it finds it in the database, it should display it here. If it does not find it in the database, it will say not found, all right? Let me pause for a minute and then ask questions. Recording. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So let's go to the main activity class. We have a function here that is called find, and then we got the ID. And then what we're going to do, first of all, I'm gonna get reference to the class, my helper class. Okay, so I'm going to do this, command copy, and then I'm going to call it in here. What we're going to do next, instead of calling the add member, we're going to say find member. So we need to go to the helper database helper class, and we need to create a new function. And this function is going to say, it's going to return to me a member if we find it. So it's going to be public. And if it finds the member, it will return to me the member. Otherwise, it would return null. I mean, we could not find it. So, and I'm gonna call this find by ID. And then I'm going to pass to it an integer value, which is the ID that we're looking for. Right? Now, it's gonna give you an error because you have not returned any value. So what I'm going to do, we just return null for now, and then we'll fix that later on, return null, okay? Or let's just create the member object. So I'm gonna say member, just put null, okay? Null. So that error disappears. And I'm gonna write some comments here. Says this func method will find the details of a member in the database using the ID, the member ID. All right, so that's what we're going to do here. I'll fix the member in a minute. Okay, and then here, let's fix that. Now, what do you do when you want to do a database transaction, lookup transaction? You do something similar to what we've done here. First, you get reference to the database. Okay. Second, you construct your query. Construct your query. This morning. Third, what do? You run your query. And then you process the result. Whatever we've done. Okay, so this is typically what you do with it. And then the last thing, obviously, you close your database. You clean up, or in bracket, close database. Okay. So those are the steps that we're going to do in this function. Get reference to the database. We have done that before, SQLite database, but we do something different here. So I'm going to type in, we get reference to the database. We say SQLite database, DB. Here, instead of DB get writable, I'm going to do get readable. Okay. All right. Oh, this, sorry. This dot get readable. What's the difference between writable and readable? Writable would lock your database. Readable would allow you to read without locking anything. So if you're just reading from the database, this is what I recommend for you to use, all right? So that's the first step. We get access to the database. The next thing, we want to run a query, select a query. Now, if you know SQL, this is usually the statement to find something in the database. Select a star from, here you can usually put your columns. Okay, I'm gonna get all the columns, so I want everything in the database. And then you put the table name. In this case, it will be members, right? Well, that's what we called it, members. Where ID, the field name ID, is it field called capital? Yeah, for a field name ID, it doesn't matter, but just to be consistent. Where select star from members, where field ID equal the value that you pass. So whatever the value that you pass here need to be here. So if I pass 5, it will have 5 here. So that's the basic SQL statement. Now we need to construct this statement either by using there's two ways to do it. You just construct it as a string, or you construct it as what we call it in Java, prepared statement. I'm not going to do the prepared statement for now. We'll do it as the basic SQL statement. The difference really in performance, and one is called dynamic and one is called static, but we're not expecting a lot of data here, so we can just use this for simplicity. So how do I construct this? So I need to define a string, and then I'm going to call that query. And then I'm going to say it's equal to what? There are parts of this that are static, will not change, like this. So I'm going to take this part, command copy, and then paste it here. But the field name, and I put space after it. But the table name, where is the table name is going to come from? We already defined a variable, a constant above says table members. So I can do that in here and say plus table members. Okay, so we got taken care of that. Now we need to look at the other part. Since this is a string and this is a variable, I need to put a plus before this, a plus after it to concatenate it to other string parts. Then I need to say this part, where ID equal this. So the where is easy. The ID is also another constant. So I'm going to say here where, and I will put space before the where. And then I will add to it again the ID from above, which is the field name. That is the field name here. All right. Then plus the last part, which is equal. Again, it's a string. I will put space, equal, again, equal space. And then the value that is being passed to me, which is this 5, which is here, I say plus 5. Oh, sorry, plus ID with the value that is being passed to me. All right. I know if you haven't done this before, it's kind of confusing, but the best way to do it, I recommend for you, you write your SQL statement like this first, and then you construct it after that. You know which part comes, this part is a static, this part is actually a variable, this part is static, this part is a variable, this part is a static, and this part is a variable. That's how you construct it, all right? Let me pause for a second and give you a minute to comprehend this and ask questions. All right, so we've done that part. Now the next step is to actually run your query. Now, how do you run the query and what do you expect? So if you say, if you use, for example, if you type in DB and you say, let me just do something here. DB dot في عندنا شيء اسمه في عندنا شيء اسمه there is something called raw query. What does that do? Raw query is similar to run query, but it'll give us back a cursor. So I'm going to say this one here. What does that require? It requires two parameters. أول شيء, it requires the query that you want to run. So I'm going to type in query here. What else it would require? It would require also a parameter. The parameter that it requires, the second parameter is if you are using dynamic SQL or prepared statement SQL, then you use question mark for the parameters. And I will cover this maybe later on, okay? But for now, I'm gonna say it's null. I'm not passing any parameters to this query. All right. The result that comes to us from here is actually a cursor. So if you click on this, introduce a local variable, we're going to call it cursor. All right. Call it cursor, call it C for simplicity. So now when this query run, it will give me the result in this cursor. What is a cursor? Cursor is basically the result set of your query. Now, in here, because I'm looking for a particular ID, it should give me only, if it finds it, it would give me only one record, right? But if you're saying select start from table without a condition or with a generic condition, then you might get a lot more. In that case, the cursor is actually a group of rows and columns. And then you can actually navigate this cursor. You can go next, back, forward, and so forth. All right. So we're going to look at this cursor in more details. Okay. So what happens next? The next thing we need to happen is that we need to process the result. So I run the query and then I need to process the result. How do I process the result? First of all, you need to do the basic things. If you type in C, there are several options for you in the cursor. Move to a particular index, row, move first, move next, get a string, get columns. So there's a lot of information that you can get from this query. We're not going to get all of that. We're going to use only a few things. The first thing you do is that there's another one called get count. Get count tells you how many you received. So this is, you could use this to say how many did I receive. But we will do it in a different way. We'll say if C move first. What does that mean? This one will tell me if there is a record in this cursor, and it will take me to the first row. Now, since there are no other row, this is the only row we will have. So we don't need to do move next, all right? So I got my query. I move to the first one. If we found it, what do we do? What do? We need to define an object. Here we say if we found it, and then here I'm going to say else, and then I'll show you what we do. So if we found it, I'll create an object. This object is going to be member equal new member. Okay, remember when we created the member, we have one constructor called member, default constructor. So if I go to the member, we have a default constructor above where you can create an object with no parameters. Then you can use the set and get method or the set method to set the parameters that you want, the attribute that you want. All right, so let's go back to my helper class. And now since I have the data, I found a record in my result set, what do I need to do? I need to say dot set ID equal to what? I'm gonna get the ID from the cursor or from here, doesn't matter. So I'm gonna say C get int, and then I need to give it the column number. How do I know the column numbers? How do I know the column numbers? So a cursor, if you think about it, it's kind of like in an Excel document. If I have, for example, this would be 1, would be 2, a name, whatever value I have here, will have whatever value I have, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, here's the field name. Let's just make these our field names. This is going to be name. This is going to be age. This is going to be city, right? This is what we have in the database. Now, the values that you got would be, for example, 1, AAA, 33, and then Sharjah. Okay, so the cursor looks like this. It has the columns and it has the row. You could have multiple rows, but in this case, we only have one row. This column is 0. This column is 1. This column is 2. And this column is 3. So if I want to get the ID, I will have to use the index 0. If I want to get the name, I will have to use the index 1. And that depends on how you create the table. So if I go back to the DB helper, and if you look how we created the table, we created the table here, the ID first, the name, the age, and the city. So this is going to be index 0, index 1, index 2, and index 3. So when I say get int, I need to give it the column name. So I wanted to get the ID. So the ID was index 0. All right. Now you do the same thing for the other one, m.setName. And then I'm going to say C get what? Get string, because this is a string. The ID was integer. The name was string. And then I will give it the column number 1. Then I say again m.set age. Again, C, because age is an integer, I will get age, and I will say the column 2. And then the last thing we have here, m.set city, and then because city is a string, I will say get city, get string, and then I will give it the name, the last index. So now I created the object. Now I set the attribute of the object and I just simply say return M. So that is the object that I found and that's what I'm returning. All right. Let me pause for a minute and give you a chance to answer questions, to ask questions. Okay, so there was one question, and it was a good question. So it says, why do we use get integer here and get string here? Well, that all depends on how you create the table. So if you go back to the top, we've said ID is an integer, name is a text, age is an integer, city is a text. So dependent on what how you defined your tables and then your attribute, your fields, and then you have to use the proper method from in the cursor. All right. So if we found it, we return the object. If we don't find it, what do we return? We return null. Maybe there are other ways to do it, but this is another simple way to do it. And then I will just remove this from here. The last thing we do here is to, we need, okay, we can't do return M here or null here without closing the database. So because you do return, it does not do the last part. So you need to, if it is equal here, we need to close the database. And I don't want to do it in two places, but we might have to do that, okay, for now. I don't like it, but it's okay. What is it giving me an error here? What is that? Delete unreachable statement. So this is not reachable. Do you know why it's not reachable? Does anybody know? Because it is before the return. So it needs to be before the return. Okay. And then I have to do it here. I should have done it in a different way. Okay, no worries. Okay, so I close the database when I find it, and I close the database even if I don't, there's no records, okay? All right, so now we've done this part. We coded the find by ID. Now, what do we need to do? We need to go back to the main activity and call that method. So if I say if I say my helper dot find by ID and pass to it the ID, which is what? This ID here. Now ID here is a string that would not work because this is expecting you to pass an integer. All right, so what do I do here? I need to cast this to an integer. So integer dot parse int and then cast it to an integer like that. You can make it a string, but what's going on here? Oh, the type is still a string. Okay, so we need to change that to an integer. And here I will use ID and close it. So this one, we will call this method. And this method, we get the helper and we call this function. Now this function is gonna give me either a member or it will give me a null, right? So what do? We need to say member, again here, equal the call to this, okay? And then what do we do in here? We say if the member that we got, that we received from this method, it's going to be either has values or null. So if I say if it is not null, what does it mean? That we found the record. If it is null, that means we did not find the record. So I'm going to define a message here again, string, and use it similar to the one above. String message equal empty for now. And then we're going to say if m does not equal to null, what does that mean? That means we actually found the value. And then what do? I want to display the information, member information on the screen. On the screen. Else, clear the screen and display a message in both cases, right? And at the end, we will say we're going to display a message that we found it or not, display information, display a toast message, right? That tells us did we find it or not, all right? So that's what we're going to do in here. So in here, the first part, if we did find it, what do we do if we found it? If we found it, I want to update the screen. How do we update the screen? First, I'm going to say the message equal member found. Second, I'm going to have all these fields that I have here, basically the name, the age, and the city updated from the member. So how do I do that? I already received the object with all its attributes. So I say m.set name with the member name that we received, m.get name. No, I'm wrong here. Here we have what did we call those attributes? We call that edit name, edit city, and edit age. So I'm going to say edit name dot set text with m dot get name. And then I do the same thing, edit name, edit age dot set text, again m dot get age. And then we say edit city dot set text with get city. And then the last thing I need to do is to do, not the last thing. So we're done with this part. We got the information from the member. There are no more information. We will update the screen. And then here, otherwise, I'm going to clear all of those. Because if you found a member and you search for another member, the previous member information will be still on the screen. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to make all that empty string. Empty string. And then here, I'm going to, so I did that the other way around, X here, so we'll put it that here. And then the message should say member not found. Command V, and then here it says message member does not exist. Okay. Does not exist. Okay, and then at the end, we will display the message. And the message will say, toast, make text, and then this is going to be this, and then the text is going to be what? The text is going to be the message, and then we're gonna make it toast length, toast dot length long, which is, or you can just put one in here, dot show, and then that's it. Okay. So that is what we are going to do with this guy. Just deleting the lines to make sure it all appears in one screen. So it should be all right. Okay. Okay. Let me pause for a minute before we try it and answer any questions. Yeah, Sabaya. Recording. Okay, so no questions, which is good. Now what we're going to do, we are going to test it and try it to see if it actually works. So I'm not going to use debug. Let's test it first. And then if there's an error, we'll debug it. So I'm gonna run it. And let's see how that works. So I know I have ID1 in there. So if I type in ID1 and I put that down, and if I type in this, we got an error. Maybe we should have debugged it. Okay, let's see what the error is. So let's look at the run. We got an exception, which is good. Could not execute method on click. All right, what's the error here? Set text. And I knew that is going to be a problem, but I said, okay, I'm gonna try it anyway to see if it works. For the age, the age is an integer, and you're trying to set the text with an ID. Let me try that first and make sure that I'm right. Okay, so I'm going to do this part where it says set age. I'm gonna fool it by concatenating it to a string, and let's try it. All right, and then we run again. So it found it. It wasn't in the database. The database is okay. So let's go back to here, and then let's type in an ID1, and then let's do this, and okay, it works. Okay. So that was the problem. So now I found this record. Now if I type in 9, I know 9 does not exist. And if I type in find, it will say member does not exist, and what? And the fields are cleared. All right. If I type in another ID, let's say 7, and then I type in find, then does not exist either. Let's try 6, and then 6 exists. So, all right, so we are guessing, right? So what you can do with this, though, what you can do is that you can actually display the following information in a list, right? Instead of doing it this way, you can do it in a list, all right? And that's going to be a future video to show you how we get the information in a list. But first, we'll write the code to get all the lists from the database, all right? Let me pause for a minute, and then we'll go to the next video. Actually, in the next video, I'm gonna show you how we can explore the database in your device and display it, okay? Because that's a difficult task typically. And if you want to export your database and examine your database, there's a nice tool to do that part, okay? Let me pause this, and this is the end of this video, and we'll see you in the next one.